So, well, it's about damn time. Borderlands 3, back where it all started for me. And you know, an unintended consequence of this backtrack to the very beginning of the series has taught me to expect two things from Borderlands: its story and its gameplay. And Borderlands 3 managed to be the best and worst of them all. So let's talk about it, and if you stick around to the end, I brought cookies. Yeah, that's how you do it. You gotta bribe them with something tasty. What the hell is that music? Oh, nice doggy! Oh, God, damn boy! Oh! Every freaking time I know better than to be on this planet! Borderlands 3 was my original entry into the series as a whole, and truthfully, I loved the game end to end. I enjoyed the story as a whole. I thought the concept of Troy and Tyreen as post-apocalyptic influencers was amusing, and the gameplay as a whole was top-notch. I really never saw a point in going back to the previous games, even though I was curious. Well, now that I have, there are quite a few things about Borderlands 3 that I'm unable to unsee, if that makes sense, now having something to compare it to. So, has my opinion of Borderlands 3 changed after playing the previous games? Yes. Are all of those changes negative? No. Actually, if I'm being honest, the negative ones weren't as extreme as I expected. They're still there, mind you, but I'm not gonna sit here and say that I hate any aspect of BL3 outright, but we'll get there. In fact, as much as I don't want to admit it with my newfound obsession with the glory that is Borderlands 2, yeah, the gameplay of 3 is by far the best it has been. The gunplay is smooth and responsive to a T, and while at this point in the series, the grit and grunge of the weapons I adored so much in Borderlands 1 has all but disappeared, that isn't exactly a shock. The weapons of Borderlands feeling like, well, actual guns kinda made its way out with the first game. Some of the weapons in 2 retained a bit of that grunge, but there is definitely a heavier emphasis on goofier weapon systems. And by the pre-sequel, well, it was nearly gone, so BL3 being devoid of any of the gritty gunmetal feeling is to be expected. And even so, the shooting feels good, I can't deny it. The third game is so much more fast-paced than the previous titles, and that's possible due to the snappy responses of the weapons and the ability to have more fluid degrees of movement. And the movement is another point. Vaulting, sliding, ground slams, all great additions to the game that just makes the combat loop that much more enjoyable. Now you have options in a fight. You can stay on the ground and just try to grind it out, or quickly take the high ground and slide into cover. Truthfully, as far as quality of life changes for the Borderlands series, the additional modes of movement was easily in the top 3. I don't think it's number 1, that is most definitely taken up by the ability to top off all of your ammo without opening the vending machine. God, how I missed that little addition. But the movement is definitely up there. It just adds so much variety to the gameplay. So many ways to approach new areas and enemies, and it really dialed up what the developers could do with boss fights. Gone are the days of Borderlands 1 bosses that are limited to ground movements and simple attacks. Now, I mean, just look at these goddamn things. Most of these bosses are epic level encounters, and even the more basic ones like Trant or Kilovolt are still intense slugfests the first time you take them on. And there are so many of them, whether they be story bosses, side bosses, or just named enemies. There seems to be an endless supply of bosses. And that's not including the raids, but hold on, we'll get there. I don't believe I ran into any bosses that were not farmable at least at some point throughout the playthrough. And speaking of that, in terms of boss farming, yeah, it's definitely rivaling 2 for my top spot in terms of enjoyment of the fight. Important specification there. The bosses of Borderlands 3, I would say, are a bit more enjoyable as they are dialed up quite a bit from the second game. But, okay, one gripe here. Where Borderlands 2 outshines 3 in terms of farming is the drops. At least in my opinion, just hear me out. Now, on paper, more legendaries equals more fun, right? You get a big orange glow and a damn near M1 Garand level of dopamine ping as it flies out of the boss, but there's too many, too often for it to feel rewarding. Honestly, this is one of my biggest problems with the farming in Borderlands 3. And it wasn't originally, but Borderlands 2 has corrupted me at this point. The legendaries don't feel rewarding. They don't feel legendary. And on top of that, they also removed pearlescence and any rarity higher than that, so they're really all you got. Some of these bosses just shit out an ungodly amount of legendaries at one time, and on top of that, there are multiple ways to make them have a higher chance of dropping them. It's just too many at once, and on the one hand, look, I get it. Borderlands 3 has a massive amount of legendaries. So yeah, upping the drop chance was probably a necessity, but unfortunately, it just makes them feel so much less special. When I get a drop that I've been farming in Borderlands 2, I'm excited. I want to know what the parts are. How lucky did I get, or are we still farming? In 3, aside from some of the grossly rare weapons, it's kind of like, oh, cool, what'd I get? I don't need it, save quit. This might also have something to do with most of the bosses, while possessing some dedicated drops, also having access to a lot of the worldwide loot pools. And honestly, on a side note, thank God there were dedicated drops in Borderlands 3, not to the same degree as 2, but definitely not as scarce as the pre-sequel. I could not take another grinder situation. So overall, I guess to make my point here is I would say specifically the boss farming fights are probably the most fun they have been, at the cost of legendaries feeling a bit less special. But in the end, it's more than worth it, because throughout all of the farming you will inevitably have to do, you are working towards one of the best endgames in the Borderlands series thus far: the mayhem levels and the takedown raids. Now, the mayhem levels amounting to what is really just a slider, I'm a bit conflicted on. I may be one of the few people out there that can say confidently, mainly due to my love of farming in Borderlands 2, that I actually really enjoy DigiPeak. I'm a masochist, I know, but I love testing what I got, seeing what areas of the gear and builds need improvements, farming out the upgrades, and seeing how I stack up. Fuck you, Binary, fuck you. Dude's been kicking my ass for 3 weeks! So yeah, that's how I like my endgame progression, and Mayhem is, well, it's different, and there are a lot of ways to circumvent the grind through it. Honestly, I'm fairly certain you can get from Mayhem 0 to Mayhem 11 in just a few hours. How many hours, I'm not sure. I'd need to do a little bit of testing on that, but the point is, it's not the hours upon hours upon hours of grinding just to get up one level. But credit where credit is due, the balancing of the Mayhem levels is far, far better than the OP levels at the top end. With OP 9 and 10, the scaling and balance becomes so wonky and skewed that you really need to be optimized to the fullest. While in Mayhem 11, as long as you are built semi-coherently and have on-level weapons, for the most part, you will be fine, with the exception of the hardest forms of content. Speaking of builds, God, talk about variety. 4 trees, 4 action skills, and enough augments to make your head spin. Definitely the most complex skill trees thus far, with a host of different options you can test out for any situation. But I don't know if I'd directly call it a win. Is it too much? I have stood by the concept that there is beauty and simplicity when it comes to skill trees, especially in Borderlands. And to be completely frank with you, there seems to be quite a handful of talents in Borderlands 3 that I don't think will ever really see much use, especially considering the peak of BL3's endgame: the takedown raids. God, these are fun. Long stretches of intense mobbing and bossing that culminates in a raid boss showdown. They will test your gear, your build, and just how well you know how to capitalize on both, especially scaled to Mayhem 11. And hey, if you make it through, the loot isn't half bad either. The takedowns are by and large the hardest content in Borderlands 3, and in turn, the most rewarding to finally get through and complete at the highest end. And truthfully, I love them. Granted, I wish there were more of them. BL2 is still going to take the win in my book for sheer amount of raid boss encounters. But BL3 is a close second, especially considering there are a few glitched raid bosses at OP 10 in the second game, so gotta dock some points there. So yeah, overall the gameplay as a whole in Borderlands 3 is, well, the best it's been so far. Even for accounting for a few of its problems, the sheer amount to do and the feel of play while farming, bossing, raiding is just top notch. Bravo, Gearbox, bravo. Okay, now let's talk story. I want to make this very clear up front. I don't hate the story in the slightest, but yes, the majority of the changes to my opinion of the game popped up here. More than likely having to do with now having 4 other games to compare it to. Anyway, character choices, tone, and fucking pacing are by far the largest and most negative opinions I have developed for the game since playing the previous installments. Look, I'll stand by it. Troy and Tyreen were interesting concepts as villains and could have been very unique to the Borderlands series, but at least to me, they are less trying to be their own characters and more trying to emulate Handsome Jack. I think it's the biggest hindrance to them. They pop in for an occasional call or monologue or to drop some attempted witty comment, but it very rarely rarely lands. Unlike Jack, who did the same thing, and almost every single time it seemed appropriate and hit like a goddamn truck. Or at the very least was funny. Instead, with Troy and Tyreen, a lot of them feel forced or misplaced, and instead of funny, they were just awkward for everyone involved. The best of their echo calls are when Troy and Tyreen play off each other's personalities. Granted, even then, a lot of those instances come off very much as, yeah, sis, and you go, bro, and that's just fucking weird sometimes. But the echoes that don't are genuinely good moments for them. It gives more insight to their relationship, and you start to get the notion that the only reason Troy listens to her is because she's a siren. Not really because he wants her to achieve the destroyer or become a god, but because he really doesn't have a choice. Then, once he gets his own siren powers, there is a complete shift in the dynamic that Tyreen clearly picks up on. And I wish so much they had just ran with that. The conflict between them could have been quite the story to watch unfold, but they didn't. Here we are. Aside from, well, the two main villains of the story, Lilith in Borderlands 3 had some decisions made for her character that were just egregious. I mean, sure, she lost her powers, and we will get to that whole thing in a second, but even without them, why is she so helpless and at times completely incompetent? I mean, she's the leader of the Crimson Raiders, and she has been for years now. Sure, in the past she's been a bit stubborn and reckless, but never helpless. I mean, come on, I don't think she made a genuine decision as leader this entire game. She kind of just got bullied by Ava and Tannis, of all fucking people, into making decisions when she was supposed to be the leader. And let's talk about Ava quick. Honestly, opinion never changed. She's annoying a lot of the time, minus some of her murder mystery stories, but that's about it. Moving on. Then there's Reese and Vaughn, where, okay, Reese might be okay. He's still kind of himself, at least to some measurable degree, and his dialogue throughout his missions are arguably some of the most enjoyable. But what the fuck did they do to Vaughn? Look what they've done to my boy. Thank God he's still ripped though. But seriously, someone missed the memo on him. Yes, Vaughn is a walking bullshit magnet at all times, but he isn't stupid all of the time. The dude is shown to be fairly intelligent and capable in Tales from the Borderlands to a degree. Give me some rope on that one. But in Borderlands 3, he's just, yeah, it's honestly just kind of sad what they did to him. Thankfully, not everyone was whacked with the character change stick. The likes of Moxie, Ellie, Marcus, Tannis, Brick, Mordecai, Tina, sorta, Claptrap, all are their usual selves. Well, Claptrap finally passed the barrier of annoyingly funny to, well, just annoying at times, which is hard to see, to be honest. I liked him so much in both games. Here in the third game, his dialogue is far too on the nose for my liking. Typically, I enjoyed it far more when there was a degree of, okay, he's a robot, he probably doesn't get what he just said. But here it's more of, oh yeah, he meant that shit. So yeah, some of the character choices here were, well, decisions to say the least. Not entirely sure who made them, but come on, man, what the hell were some of these choices? Oh, and as you may have noticed, I left out a rather large character change, mainly Maya's death, but that brings us over to Tone anyway, so yeah, Tone. It's all over the damn place in Borderlands 3. And I mean the whole damn spectrum and the graph it fucking sits on. Happy, sad, jokey, serious, mysterious, obvious, smart, dumb. Like, I can't get a read on what overarching tone was the goal here. The best example is in fact Maya's death. For one, a serious moment that also managed to feel completely unnecessary is completely dealt with by the end of the mission in one lousy speech. It's actually one of Ava's better moments for me because she calls this bullshit when she sees it. Oh, Maya's dead. She was a good vault hunter. Anyway, moving on. What the fuck? Hold up. Roland's death was at least treated with some dignity, even though there was a looming time crunch. But at least there a few missions passed before the full-on jokes came back. Like, come on, man. Respect for the dead. Just give us 5 minutes here. And that isn't the only instance, though it is the most prominent. Multiple times throughout the game, it wants you to take some of these moments so seriously, but they undercut it far too quickly with a bad joke or just plain waltzing over what happened, and that just isn't fun for the player. If you can't tell what the tone is supposed to be, how are you just supposed to know if a moment is actually serious or if it's just another moment for a quick funny? This whiplash of tone does a hefty bit of damage to the story, but it pales in comparison to what I think is the biggest issue of Borderlands 3's story, and that is the pacing. Buckle up. It's a two-pronged problem, but it's just bad. And I'll be honest with you, I never noticed it until I played the previous games. But now I can't unsee it. This story is both in a rush and going nowhere fast at the same damn time. Back to the Calypso twins and their Jack-like tendencies, they almost follow the same path as him. In the beginning, they write you off as another vault thief they can get rid of, and eventually you become their nemesis. One problem: they write you off and rank you as a nemesis literally within the first 3 chapters. In Borderlands 2, this was a much slower burn. Jack writes you off for the first quarter of the game, spends the second quarter wondering why the hell you're still around, proceeds throughout the third quarter ramping up in frustration that he just can't seem to kill you, and then you are in a nemesis blood feud. Blood feud! For the home stretch. With Troy and Tyreen, it's, oh look, another dumb vault thief. Oh, you said you were gonna stop us? Nemesis. What? They have no idea if you're able to stop them. We've done nothing to prove it. We just got here, but all right, that was fast. Then they spend the rest of the game detailing their master plan, acting like you can't stop them. Cause I guess that's how it works. If you're a day 1 nemesis, you need to know the whole plan up front so there's no confusion. Why? I don't know. Meanwhile, fuck, maybe we can't stop them because we're off just opening other vaults to stop her from maybe opening it and stealing the vault energy, or we're just helping out monks. Which, okay, but aren't they trying to wake the destroyer? Shouldn't we maybe go deal with that? Nope, that can wait. Atlas needs our help over a corporate dispute. Okay, well, I like Reese, so I'm more than happy to help. Wait, oh no, they found a vault. We need to stop them. On it. Holy fuck, they killed Maya. Don't worry about that. It's time for Eden 6 for 9 fucking hours. Wait, why? There's another vault there. Oh, okay, that makes sense. We're gonna go find that first? Sorta, but first you need to find all 3 pieces of the key in the most long-winded way possible that totally won't feel like you're doing a bunch of chores. Seriously, is there a reason this needs to be so drawn out? Content. No. Okay, got the AI, got the key, it's vault time. No, now go kill Aurelia. Why? What the fuck? I guess sorry, Aurelia, you were cool in the pre-sequel, but apparently they don't like you anymore. Okay, it's vault time. Oh, they didn't actually care about this one. Hold the fuck on. Then why was I here for so long? Cause content. No, this is so disconnected from what is going on. Are we trying to stop her or not? What the fuck? Is it time to go after Troy yet? He's been doing some bullshit in the corner while we've been fucking around on Eden 6. It sure is. Right after this long quest cycle for a psycho circus. What? Also, no hate to Pain and Terror. Genuinely some of the more amusing characters in Borderlands 3. Now we stop Troy. Finally, we got his ass. Incoming Typhon DeLeon plot twist thing, I think. Okay, what the fuck? He should have just stayed a map bonus objective. Why is he an important character now? Kill Tyreen. And we're done. Anyway, yeah, so the pacing is a thing in this game. It seems like they had a ton of ideas they didn't want to leave on the cutting room floor and just shoved in a bunch of shit wherever it fit. More to a point I had made earlier, had they headed in more of a direction of a conflict between Troy and Tyreen, which they started but quickly ended, I think the pacing would have been better. At least then it would have a single focus point. But as the game progressed, truthfully starting at Eden 6, the pacing seems confused. In one breath, we are in a hurry to stop her from opening the vault of the destroyer, but we seem to be taking long extended breaks to do a lot of unrelated tasks under the guise of it's critical to the story. So on top of the events of the story revving engines at a red light, what really just compounds the pacing problem is the constant need to return to Sanctuary every 5 minutes or some other hub for a long bout of dialogue or lengthy exposition dump. Or a personal favorite, character interactions you can't skip and lock you to an area until they're done talking. Overall, if I had to pick one reason for my opinion change on Borderlands 3's story, it would have to be the pacing, hands down. Truthfully, I could let everything else go, but the pacing isn't one of them. It's just too hard to sit through over and over and over on each Vault Hunter. Which I guess as we get to replayability, there is one final gripe I have, and that's the simple fact that true Vault Hunter mode is pointless in Borderlands 3. There's no new weapons, enemies, rarities, anything like that at all. And yeah, that just kind of sucks historically speaking for the series. TVHM and UVHM were huge parts of the replayability aspect of the games, mainly because they added so much and they were such a challenge. But there's no point to them here. Actually, UVHM isn't even a choice here because the world already scales with you. While this is sad in terms of breaking formula from the previous game, it kinda does do Borderlands 3 a favor due to how the story is paced. I really don't know if I could sit through 3 playthroughs on one character, but thankfully I don't have to. The replayability of 3 is entirely in its endgame, and it seems like Gearbox may have figured that out, as there's an option to start a fresh character at max level post-story. Yeah, I feel like that's a bad sign when the game says, yeah, skip the story, that's fine. But yeah, even with a fresh level 72, there is a mountain to climb before you hit Mayhem 11 and can best the takedowns. And that isn't the only option for you. There are also 4 playable DLCs excluding Designer and Director Cut, which my personal favorite has to either be Guns, Love, and Tentacles or Psycho Krieg's Fantastic Fustercluck. And look, in truth, they're all great. They add some amazing guns and gears to farm up, and as far as their individual stories go, they are far better paced than the main story, and honestly quite a bit more interesting, which is both great and kinda sad at the same time. I mean, maybe Borderlands 3's biggest problem was its length, huh? Anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah, right. Yeesh, this is way longer than I meant it to be. Last thing, I promise. The Slaughter Shaft is also a boost to replayability. For one,
Circle of Slaughter! Let's fucking do this!
and on a more serious note, it's a great way to get loot and test out any build or gear you want. I know personally I will use it if I want to try out any kind of new variation on a build, maybe if I'm going after the takedown or want to see how it's going to do in mobbing, or to see if I could actually get full use out of any specific gun. The best place I can test it is the Slaughter Shaft because it actually gets pretty difficult and there's a ton of enemies to fight. Plus, you know, seeing this on your map never hurt. Okay, yeah, maybe the excessive legendaries isn't all bad. So, in the end, did my opinions on the game change after playing the previous titles? Of course they did, but they didn't change in the places I expected. I expected to come back and hate the story, which I don't. I despise the pacing and constant back and forth, but not the concept of the story as a whole. I was expecting to come back and think the gameplay was mediocre and too generous with its farming. To a degree, I stand by the generosity being a little over the top, but no. Borderlands 3 is the best gameplay in the series, hands down. And I say this with a newfound obsession with the second game. Borderlands 3 stands as what is most likely the best and yet the worst game in the series for entirely 2 different reasons, which is so damn confusing at times. To hit this high of a level with the feel of its gameplay and quality of life improvements over the previous titles, and to fall so low with the story's pacing and tone, then compounded by the fact that Borderlands 3 not only had to follow the second main game, the pre-sequel, and freaking Tales from the Borderlands, Tales arguably being the best Borderlands story thus far, the fall was so much more noticeable and had me as the player wincing knowing that that level of faceplant even Reese wouldn't attempt. Borderlands 3 is a fantastic game with a story that you'll have to suffer the pacing of at least once, but try to enjoy it if you haven't played the game yet. In concept, the story isn't bad, and the endgame that awaits on the other side is more than worth it. Bittersweet, man, bittersweet. Well, that's about it for me. Honestly, it better be. This was a bit longer than I intended it to be, but apparently I had a lot to say. If you enjoyed, maybe consider liking the video if, you know, if it's not too much trouble. Or if you think I missed anything, let me know down below. Been waiting to get back here, so I'm curious how people feel about Borderlands 3 as a whole. Well, we now know the release date of Borderlands 4, and it seems like we've got quite a long time before then. So I think for now we'll take a small break from Borderlands. The next game in the series will be Wonderland, so I'd like to give myself a decent amount of time to digest it. Speaking of which, as these games get longer and longer, it might not be realistic for them to come out every Friday, as I would prefer not to rush it, so might dabble with some other forms of videos just in case I need the space. Either way, something will be out every Friday, I swear it. Anyway, see ya.